Well, welcome back to another episode of the Kansas City Commercial Real Estate Market Pulse. We've got a special 5-part series on data center real estate. Look, I mean, it's hard to have a conversation about commercial real estate right now without data centers coming up. AI and cloud computing, they're driving enormous demand for digital infrastructure. Power availability is changing the way all sites are being evaluated. There's trillions of dollars being committed to new development across the country, but there is a lot more to the story than just data centers are booming. So I want to reintroduce everyone here to Mitch Case, who is on the team here at Midwest Commercial Real Estate Advisors. Mitch, we just left the plaza on a mission critical behind the meter panel, heard from some folks that are out there doing these types of developments, the challenges there. Welcome to the Data Center Deep Dive series, Mitch.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation with a bunch of different aspects from equipment providers to infrastructure leaders and developers all across the board. So it was fun to kind of hear all the different sides of the story there.
Absolutely. Look, we're going to be getting into the real estate behind the headlines. So, why power has become such a critical piece of site selection, what actually is driving demand, what makes a site work or not work for data center development, how AI and cloud growth are changing this equation, and which markets are positioned to benefit better than others. There is a massive amount of capital and attention moving towards this sector right now. And I think it's important for those of us in commercial real estate to understand what's actually happening underneath the headlines. So we're super excited about this 5 episode series on data centers. And everybody wants to know, is there a way for me to get involved? So if you are here live, make sure to drop in to the comments section. We are engaging, we are managing that as well. Michael Meyer, Lauren Breichel, Susie, Kristen, Donna, and Calvin all coming here live, putting in good questions already for us that we're going to be talking about. And, this series is specifically designed for 4 key audiences, all right? Landowners looking to understand their property's potential, operators managing facilities, developers planning projects, and compute users who need reliable infrastructure. And we're going to break down what actually matters in the data center site selection and development. All right. 3 core themes that we're going to explore throughout is how electrical infrastructure makes or breaks a project, what physical characteristics on the land side determine viability. And then today, our main topic is speed to token, which I thought was interesting because we heard speed to power as the theme at the mission critical panel that we were just out, hosted by the KC Tech Alliance and the KC Tech Council with the Data Center Alliance component there. What we think speed to token really is the timeline and execution required to get a facility operational. All right. We want to give you our core promise because what I will say, there are a lot of people posting about this, a lot of cowboys out there. And frankly, we have engaged with them just this week on a lot of the data centers. But our core promise is we want to be the bridge connecting land, buildings, and live compute. All right. We understand site qualification from the ground up. And I think our unique position is that we're able to speak fluently to both sides, owners and users. So we have been the translation between powered land, industrial conversion, operating capacity, and real market demand. Who do we serve, right? We serve the supply side. That's landowners, industrial property owners, developers. We even work with municipalities sitting on assets that they want to reposition. And then on the demand side, you've got the neo cloud operators, the enterprise AI teams, the cloud companies, colo providers, which everyone is very desperate for capacity right now. And then on the infrastructure side, what I will say is this is a new layer into this component, right? So powered shell owners, existing data center operators, utilities, infrastructure partners all come into the equation. And I think that most players only understand one side of the equation. And we're uniquely positioned because we understand all three. And that's what makes us invaluable as the connector component for you in this industry. Okay. And I just want to pull up. We've got some live folks already showing up. We got Saswata Ghana saying private equity players are funding the CapEx and credit market, looking at it as an opportunity. Is it the right time considering still clarity is lacking about monetization? Great question. What I will say is I was listening to Lightbox's most recent episode, and I think that's a great podcast for everyone to check out. BREIT, which is Blackstone's real estate investment trust, their largest fund, I think, moved out of self-storage and have already moved into the digital infrastructure side of things. Again, NVIDIA just announced a $500 billion partnership with some of the largest asset managers in the world, right? And so they are saying, like, we are building, this is a new asset class to invest in. So Saswata, I don't know exactly if this is the right time. I will say that this is the right time to figure out where you want to play within this ecosystem. And the future for currency, in my mind, is compute in a lot of ways. So the building owners, the landowners, the developers figuring out how to understand where the power is, what the demand looks like, are really the ones that are winning in today's market. All right. So Mitch, I'm going to flip this over to you, right? I'm going to open with some core tension. Okay. So AI demand for tokens is exploding, right? But the real constraint isn't just chips. It's the entire ecosystem: power, land, cooling, permits, how fast you can actually build and you can deploy. So why don't you walk through, from the conversations that you've been having with groups, what really speed to token actually means and what you're seeing out in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, is making it as simple as possible with speed to token is kind of what you alluded to earlier. Is just how fast can we get to the point where these customers, these neo clouds, the actual individuals that need the data from these data centers can generate revenue. You always hear kind of speed to market, or we heard speed to power. I mean, this is how fast can we actually start computing and generating revenue based off of that. It takes a lot to be able to say that you can start generating revenue from a customer perspective on that side. So the demand that we are really kind of talking about, and the constraints that continue to show up between, I always kind of talk about 5 to 6 different scenarios that are going to be constraints within a given site. You've got your power is very obvious. The community involvement is obviously top of mind right now, but you've got to take into consider water availability, natural gas availability. And then you kind of get into your typical building due diligence or site due diligence from zoning and permitted use. Just because you have a building or land that's industrial and by permitted by use does not necessarily mean that you can actually bring in a data center. There's more that goes into that. And so a lot of those items are the stop signs that we've got to kind of work through slowly to make sure that when we bring opportunities, or when we see opportunities, that we can quickly understand what that story is, understand how we can present that to a developer, present that to an off-taker, to make sure that they have confidence that the speed to token is their best opportunity throughout that site.
Well said. One point that I do want to make here is that the Midwest really isn't the backup plan anymore. It's where the action is shifting. All right. Primary markets are saturated. Secondary markets are where the growth is really happening now. Some markets that I continue to see, right? Missouri, Kansas, obviously. Arkansas coming on in a big way. Ohio coming in a big way. Around Michigan coming in a big way, right? So I think what has happened is the origin story of data centers is obviously out in Loudoun County, Virginia. Okay, that's the Mecca. And I just heard this week that there's up to $6 million per megawatt being purchased in that location. So that obviously means there's a lot of demand for a little bit of supply. So what does that mean? Similarly, which happens in commercial real estate, people start chasing yield in other markets, right? And so I think that there's this shift, and we'll talk a lot about the community aspects of this in one of our episodes, is that look, you have to have a community, a city that really wants to bring a data center operator into their location. And so it's very important to remember those components. I mean, speed to token, Mitch did a great job kind of walking us through this, is the critical metric for artificial intelligence operators. It measures how quickly you can generate revenue producing tokens. And before any tokens flow, you need real estate and you need infrastructure. This is not optional. It's the foundation that everything else builds upon. Okay. So you start with your land acquisition, right? You got to find the right site. Then you got your power procurement, secure, reliable, affordable power. You have entitlements and permits. You got to navigate the regulatory requirements at local, state, and federal levels. Then you have the construction and fit out, right? You got to build the physical facility. You have to actually get the equipment to be able to put into the facility. Then you got to commission this thing. You got to test everything thoroughly to ensure your reliability before even going live. And then you finally get to your live compute, right? Finally operational and generating tokens. And like every week of delay compounds. A month lost in site qualification is a month of zero revenue and competitors gaining ground. And I think that the speed to token is not just AI algorithms. It's about executing this infrastructure chain flawlessly. And in these 6 components, there's about 500 subcomponents within each one of these categories. And now you can see why and how complex this process actually is. So we always look for markets that have a high barrier of entry, a high level of complexity, because if we can partner with the right technical experts on the engineering side, on the electrical side, and we understand where the demand actually is going, then we start to utilize our own, what I'll call expertise with commercial real estate and relationships to be able to complete this puzzle for these folks that are looking to execute in this space. Look, 12 months ago, when Mitch and I were starting to have a lot of calls on these things, man, we would get off of a call and say, hey, do you know what that acronym meant? Do you know what that one was? And the answer was always no. But guess what? Now we're pretty fluent in this new language, right? And I think that if you are a single tenant net lease developer, think of it this way. If you find a site and you have a letter of commitment from an end user, now you know the site that you're looking for, you know what you need to build out, but there's just a lot more complexity in that fit out and build out. But I think that that is the opportunity. We've started to see a flood of these operators and these folks that are in this space trying to figure this out. So we're here to kind of clean those lines up for you, obviously bring opportunities, but knowing the supply side and the demand side has been so important for Mitch and I and the team here at Midwest Commercial Real Estate Advisors to help advise our clients on the best routes forward. Okay. Now, one thing I want to talk about, though, I'm going to double click on is the hyperscale backlog. Okay. So the core problem here is that hyperscalers have exhausted capacity in the traditional hubs, Northern Virginia, Phoenix, and we don't even want to start talking about Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're all hitting walls, right? You have year-long power queues, limited available land, utility interconnection delays that stretch your timelines. Look, this bottleneck is not temporary. It's structural. This is years of hypergrowth that have outpaced the infrastructure development in these markets. And that is why we are starting to see this major shift, okay? So we're seeing this shift into secondary markets. Let me put this nice little graphic up here. Love AI. Great job, Gamma, with the primary and secondary markets here. That might have taken me a little bit of time to generate myself with my pen, right? So you think about this, and this shift into the secondary markets, especially the Midwest, are becoming viable alternatives, okay? Because you have available land. You have shorter power queue timelines. You have faster deployments. You have lower costs in a lot of different components, right? And so you have this opportunity now, and what we have been telling our clients, if you're an industrial operator, right? Or if you're a land person and you've been banking on land, we can help identify what the best and highest use will be for that site, right? Because just like Mitch mentioned, if you just have a building and you think you might have some power, there's a lot to be figured out before you actually have an actual site. So it's very important why you think about this. And we have due diligence checklists, the questions that you need to be asking. I mean, we must be advising probably 17, 18 individuals right now, just trying to figure out, do we actually have a site, right? And so, Mitch, I want to pass the baton over to you and talk a little bit about somewhat, on the Midwest now, why the site readiness versus, the competitive advantage that we're seeing here, man. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing kind of move into the Midwest and why.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having lived in the Midwest my entire life, you kind of get yourself into this bubble that it's kind of always, been the same way, or it's always been like it is right now. And, in my previous career as a mechanical engineer, the sites I was working on were in Northern Virginia, Western Tennessee, Eastern Tennessee, even into Texas and Oklahoma, with a lot of these areas that just had a lot of connectivity already from that side of things.
That's right.
But when we kind of move into the Midwest side of things, the thing that we are consistently hearing is the amount of farmland that is out there, available land, and typically at the cost of what that is from an acre perspective. We have untapped power in this area, whether that is available power or trapped power, that we can kind of talk about a little bit more. But then we start getting into the connectivity side of things. So years and years and years. I mean, a decade ago, we've got a facility in Kansas City that became a carrier hotel, and along the lines of just an open highway for connectivity to get to some of those major hyperscalers. That is extremely valuable when we start talking about inference data centers or edge data centers.
Absolutely.
So that connectivity is incredibly important. Now, the further, you get to a coast, you get to more southern cities, like you're starting to lose advantages in regards to natural disasters between hurricanes and other things along those lines. We don't experience those here in the Midwest, although we will get a tornado here or two every once in a while. But you start getting into opportunities to take advantage of, obviously the cost of power is a little bit lower in this area, but you also start to take advantage of the environment being a little bit cooler environments, requiring less out of the equipment that is required to keep these data centers cooled appropriately. So there's a lot of advantages that typically trying to just come into the idea of nobody thinks about this area, so nobody's here. So cost of acquisition of land can be a little bit lower. Cost of power is a little bit lower. Untapped natural gas is, I'm not going to say the word rampant, but it is available in these areas, which are all 3 out of those 5 or 6 components that are incredibly important to this area. So that's kind of at a high level capacity that helps each of these developers as they and customers as they continue to hit constraints in some of these larger markets come into here. And now they see that not only can they build these at a little bit lower cost or have less costs on the operation side of things, but actually can get to speed to token, speed to power, speed to operation much, much faster than they can in these main markets.
Absolutely. The other thing that we'll just double click on real quick is the attractive state incentives, right? Mm-hmm. So Kansas, Missouri, and others are actively competing for this investment with tax breaks, with grants, with fast track permitting. That's real money that's on the table. And so all of these factors that Mitch mentioned really combine to compress timelines, right? We can qualify sites, build, and go live faster than many other locations. And the site readiness isn't just a nice to have anymore. It is the primary differentiator in the race for AI compute capacity. And the Midwest is really giving operators that edge. And if you look up the amount of hyperscalers and other projects that are going on in the Midwest versus just other locations, you will see those numbers start to creep up, okay? So again, there's a lot of bottlenecks out there right now, right? It's not just chips. I mean, everyone talks about GPU shortages, but that's not necessarily the real constraint. The actual bottleneck is the infrastructure. That's the physical and regulatory systems needed to power and to cool these massive facilities. Okay, so again, we've talked a lot about power and the utility that have long interconnection queues, right? Getting capacity takes time, right? You've got transformers that have month-long lead times, and this alone can delay projects by a year or more, right? We have land, sites that are already zoned that have power available and they're ready to build are extremely rare. So competition is fierce for those sites. Cooling, water rights obviously been a very important topic in the data center community. You need sophisticated cooling systems. Entitlement, you got permitting and zoning approvals. Those are not quick. You have environmental reviews, community pushback, local politics. This can add 12 to 24 months easily for a site. Then you have capital, right? I mean, the construction financing alone for data centers, I mean, it's still evolving. Like, lenders don't always understand this asset class. So building the right capital stack is a lot harder than it sounds. Okay, so chips are almost a commodity at this point, right? There's both folks that have them. But what's actually scarce is the ability to plug them in, to cool them, and to get the regulatory approval to operate them, right? And this is where the real speed to token gets determined, not in the fab, but in the real world, okay? So just thinking about navigating this AI infrastructure landscape. And I think this is something that Mitch and I have started to see over the last year and a half. Like, if you are a hyperscaler or you're looking for greenfield locations, that is a strategy. It is a strategy that we just discussed that can take a very long time and with a lot of complexity. What we are seeing a lot of people, a lot of groups really shift into is covered land plays that already have buildings on them that are able to be repurposed into an AI inference data center campus. Okay. And so that's what's working now because of the speed to be able to get there. If you have existing buildings, you have existing zoning, you have existing power, the question that you have to ask and the answers that you need are a whole lot easier to get to because you're not generating something brand new out of thin air. Because I think a lot of people miss this point. To build anything is hard. You want to build a multifamily deal, a retail deal, an office deal, an industrial deal. Just development is hard, right? Then you layer in the complexities of what we just communicated with all of the uniqueness of an AI or a data center, and it's very difficult, right? So you're adding another layer on there. So what's really winning in this speed game, seemingly, is looking at industrial sites. I've seen office sites. I've seen a lot of these buildings that are vacant or they're underutilized that are existing, figuring out how to convert into a building. So I want to emphasize the point that these end users, the AI companies, the neo clouds, they're desperate for ready capacity. And so a lot of companies, a lot of groups are shifting their focus into converting existing facilities. So Mitch, why don't you talk to that just a little bit more in detail when we're out looking, or maybe a property owner is like, well, I own a bunch of properties. Yeah, I'm curious to know if my site might be a good one. What do we typically look for?
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to come back to those 5 or 6 items right off the bat, from a community perspective. And I know, Logan and I are both in that campus of, keeping the community involved at an early perspective so that there isn't anything that feels like it's behind closed doors or anything along those lines. We see constantly developers that are succeeding in that space, educating from that side of things. So first and foremost, when we start looking into these existing buildings, is it permitted by use? Is it according to zoning, an industrial application that can be used in that space? If not, you're going to have to go through a rezoning process, and that's typically going to involve a lot of council member approval, a lot of community approval. You will be at an uphill battle. Now, just because you are permitted by use does not necessarily mean, especially as we hear a lot about moratoriums in specific municipalities, as we hear about more questionnaires coming in, special use permits, conditional use permits, a lot of these things are now starting to be applied to data center use. So just because you have something that says you can, there's still the possibility that we need to go through that. That almost that first step right then and there can decide whether or not a project is worth pursuing in that moment, just because you've got other municipalities that are providing letters of approval that say, hey, we are open for business from a data center perspective. And so wherever the lack of friction is where these developers want to be and go. Again, going back to speed to token. The obvious one here is power. We're seeing timelines and queues years until you get any sort of confirmation on any sort of power. We have, currently in our market right now, we have an 8-week minimum RFI, and we receive letters and emails back that we're now being pushed till the beginning of the year. So it is an ever-changing, evolving timeline on what is required to even understand if there is available power to that. So I think when we're looking at sites initially, we are looking for that existing building that's already zoned correctly, and maybe we need to go through a special use permit or conditional use permit, whatever that may be. We have a good indication that power was once there. Maybe that was an old manufacturing facility, a paper mill, power plant, whatever it may be, that it has the ability to receive power, which is going to give us a faster speed to token from that side of things. And, one thing that's kind of continually stood out to us is, what is the proximity to new and existing substations? Those are all necessarily, those don't indicate that there is available power necessarily, but it gives you a good percentage of confidence that, it is available, it is there, or it can be there with limited amount of infrastructure upgrades. Again, going right back to speed to token. Those are probably those top two items. The further out you get into more rural areas, you're going to start encountering fiber connectivity challenges, water availability challenges. But as you get into those areas, natural gas is a little bit more available potentially from pipelines going around. So I always kind of emphasize those first two with the zoning aspect and the potential for power. Once we kind of check those boxes that it's worth pursuing, then we're going to dig into more of the additional assets that might be available to that building through the water, gas, and fiber.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. So some key takeaways from this first episode in the data center deep dives, right? Speed to token is foundational. So every day of delay that you have from acquiring land to having live compute directly eats into profitability, right? And this is the core constraint that's driving the market. And that journey from land acquisition to live compute is a complex chain. And we could spend an episode on each one of those components. We won't do that, because it might be a little bit boring for you to evaluate those things. But, if you are an industrial owner and you're curious to know, is my site a good site? Reach out to us. We have a Midwest site qualification toolkit, okay? So we have the ability to grade, to give you a rubric of the things that we need to figure out if your site could be a good location for a data center or not, okay? So that's number one. Number two, demand spilling over to secondary markets, right? We've talked a lot about the traditional data center hubs are saturated with massive backlogs, okay? So people are looking elsewhere, and that's creating real opportunity, right? We have the ingredients here in the Midwest: available land, reliable power, whether it be hydro, wind, utility, natural gas. We have that infrastructure, okay? So those are things to keep in mind. And the real bottlenecks are really not just what you think. It's not just about chips. It's about power and entitled land and cooling capacity, and the capital availability are the actual constraints that are limiting your scale. Okay, so as we move forward, we benefit from perspectives from a few key players. So if you are a NeoCloud operator who understands deployment timelines, AI infrastructure, allocators making capital decisions, utility consultants who can navigate power challenges, and developers that are already operating in secondary markets, reach out to us. We'd love to interview you on the show and tell your story about the projects that you're working on, what you're seeing into the marketplace. And again, this is episode 1 of 5. Okay, so we're going to be coming to you, maybe weekly, maybe bi-weekly here very soon, but we'll make sure to give you guys notice when we're having our second episode. We're really going to talk about site selection in that next episode, how landowners can qualify for data center demand, okay? But in the meantime, if you're looking to move faster on your site, again, we have created a toolkit specifically for qualifying Midwest locations, okay? So comment below, reach out to Mitch or myself and download that, so that you can get started on your acceleration strategy and figuring this component out. Because I'll tell you, you wait, 6 months from now and you reach out to us, it's going to take us 3 to 6 months to validate your site and completely de-risk it for one of our operators or our developers to take that on, okay? And Mitch and I continue to tell individuals when we're working with them and they hire us to engage with them on a regular basis that, look, we are not going to rush this process, because every single line item that we can de-risk, fiber, zoning, community support, power, water, right, location-wise, all the different components, the better your site is going to look. And I think that most of these groups that are actually operating within this space right now are getting bombarded, right? I've got a barn It's out there in the farm, and I've got some what looks to be pretty big KV lines, power lines coming in. I think I've got a site. We go through a rigorous checklist to de-risk these things to the components that really make sense for an operator. Okay, so reach out to us, download the Midwest Site Qualification Toolkit. Mitch and I can send it over to you. We'd be happy to discuss with you. Episode 2 is all about site selection, so make sure to tune in for that episode as well. And again, if you are operating within this space, you have a story to tell, you've got a project to highlight, reach out to us. We'd love to have you on the show talking about what you're seeing in the marketplace. So this has been another episode of the Kansas City Commercial Real Estate Market Pulse special series, Data Center Deep Dives, with a special guest, Mitch Case. Mitch, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Logan.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody tuning in. I want more questions next time. I see all of you guys lurking there.
Lingering in the back.
in the background. Bring your questions, drop them in there, reach out to us. We'd love to engage with you live. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back together with you guys here very soon.
All right, take care.